In the previous lecture, I described how to recycle building materials in architecture. And I used as an example this bathroom in my house. This lecture continues this subject. A further example of recycling building materials in this little room is these hexagonal slate shingles on the wall above the bathtub. The essence of these thin slabs of stone, and I have one right here, is that they shed water. You've probably seen these on slate shingle roofs. After finding a whole bunch of these in a backyard 10 miles away, I nailed them on the wall above the tub, much the way one nails shingles on a roof. One of the biggest troves of recycling treasures that I found for my house regards this little steel railing on the near side of the tub. This railing's pieces came from the floor of a factory 20 miles away that had gone out of business. After driving my Chevy Blazer inside the factory, I folded down the back seats and picked up pieces of scrap off the floor and loaded them in. When the metal was only 3 inches deep on the floor of my car, I noticed the tires were half flat from the accumulating weight. I stopped loading and slowly drove home. I drove back for one more load. I could have had half a dozen if I wanted. On site, after trying my hand at welding and blacksmithing, 2 skills I had no previous experience in, from the metal I collected, I not only built this little railing around the bathtub, I constructed a 32-foot-long railing for my house's 3-story tall staircase. And I built a 31-foot-long tool hanger in the garage. And I built a 37-foot-long drainage grate in front of the garage doors that 38 years later is still working as good as the day I built it. And I also built a 13-foot-long drainage grate at the top of the driveway. And I also built many other smaller items throughout the house. That's a lot of architecture for 80 miles of gasoline, wouldn't you say? Another recycling adventure that ended up in this bathroom concerns the thick wood post rising from on one side of the bathtub and the weathered boards on the front of the vanity here. These came from a 250-year-old barn 70 miles away. I reused one of the barn's hand-hewn beams for this post, and I used some of the weathered siding for the front of the vanity and the trim around this mirror and these shelves here. And I also fashioned the weathered siding into cabinets, shelves, doors, and base molding throughout the house in every room. Since this siding was very dirty, I brought out its essence as follows. I lightly wire brushed each piece. I'm going to show you this old board, which is one of the original boards I took out of this barn 38 years ago. I lightly wire brushed each piece on all 4 sides in the direction of the grain. Where the grain was swirly, I matched the swirls with my brush strokes. Then I tapped each piece a few times on the turnaround where I was working to knock out the dirt. Then 3, I hosed each piece down. It was amazing how dirty the water was that flowed out of each board. And then 4, I sun-dried each board for 2 days. This is a simple, superb method of turning the oldest, filthiest board you ever saw into an attractive finish you'll never have to paint. In the old barn I dismantled for this house, I also cut the barn's long, slim rafters into mullions and placed them 4 feet apart in 6 long ribbon windows, one of which is 161 feet long, that wrap around the house on 3 sides. Let me show you this picture of what some part of it looks like. See this picture? This is inside my garage. See how that window looks? It just wraps like a ribbon completely around the house. Now, some recycled materials may cost nearly as much as analogously new materials purchased retail. For example, regarding the old barn I reused in my house, I paid a carpenter who lived near the barn to dismantle it. I paid a crew of 4 men to load the barn beams and siding onto my excavator's backhoe trailer. I paid the excavator to haul these materials 70 miles to my house. And I paid a couple laborers to clean the beams and siding on site. And all these outlays together came near to what I would have paid for similar beams and boards bought at a commercial lumber yard. But here's another truth about recycling. The checks I wrote for this lumber went not to merchants and managers in other parts of the country, even the world, but to local people. Indeed, the money spent in procuring, packaging, transporting, and preparing all these recycled materials is a local stimulus package of which any American president would be proud. The recycled lumber, reused rocks, retrieved liquor bottles, recovered shingles, and reclaimed steel in my house have another quality that is missing in new building materials. The older they get, the better they look. Admittedly, a lot of imagination went into creating this architecture, but the more of this resource you consume, the more that remains. In the above residence, these recycling directives were taken to a higher level of fullness and refinement than what would have earned a top score on any environmental checklist. In fact, this dwelling not only is environmental, it looks environmental. It plays the part. It practices what it preaches, inside and out. From the living room, the barn rafter mullions between the long ribbon windows every 4 feet, wrapping around 3 sides of this space. Make the living room, when you're in the living room, you feel like you're in the forest outside. And the weathered trim around the windows looks like the tree's branches. The rocks in the chimney mast behind you look exactly like the rocks laying on the ground outside. All of which makes you feel like you're outdoors when you're in. As if untrammeled nature flows in through one side of the house and out the other. As if the wind has blown through the place for a century. A few weeks ago, an outdoorsman who makes his living conducting eco tours around the world visited my house. While standing in the front hall, he said, "The place smells like the outdoors." Buildings like this need no scorecard to judge them by, a penned effort to render their values as exemplary. And they can be built by an amateur with ordinary hand tools. When I was in architecture school 50 years ago, my history professor showed color slides of Simon Rodia's monumental Watts Towers, 2 of them nearly 100 feet tall, built by this one man. And he showed slides of Anthony Gaudi's gorgeous serpentine benches rimming the large public square, the public terrace of the Park Güell in Barcelona, Spain. These architectural works were made of trash, shattered china, defective tiles, collected seashells, broken bottles, yet they are studied in the halls of academia as examples of the finest architecture in the world. Look on these mighty works at Wiki Watts Towers and Wiki Park Whale. You'll be delighted at what you see.